Officer Megan Raskin believed she was handling just another excuse-making suspect, until the man. She stopped, uncovered her lies with a Secret Service badge and a crowded courtroom waiting. "You can't be serious, officer." Megan Raskin said with a smirk. Loud enough for the jury to hear, she shook her head like she'd heard it all before. The courtroom, crowded with people, waiting for the next case to be called, had gone dead silent. All eyes were on the tall, well-dressed black man standing behind the witness stand, his voice, calm posture, unshaken. His name was Darren Cole, 32 crisp. Gray suit, steady tone from the outside. He didn't look like trouble yet to Raskin. That's exactly what he'd been, the moment she pulled him over on the outskirts of Valdosta, Georgia, 3 weeks earlier now. Here they were, Courtroom 4B, Tuesday morning. The judge, Honorable Brenda Leary, leaned in slightly, watching it unfold without saying a word. Megan had already given her testimony. Quick, nearly offhand, like as if this weren't worth more than a few minutes of the court's time. Darren's car contained illegal tint. She said he was being uncooperative. He seemed suspicious. He escalated the confrontation, and now that he was recounting his side in calm tones, specifically, she couldn't even conceal the amusement on her face. "You're telling me," Megan cut in. "Arms crossed, you were just traveling through on some business," her tone supplied. The quotation marks. The courtroom snickered. Someone in the back hacked hard, covering a laugh. But Darren didn't bat an eye. He waited for quiet, and when he had it, he opened his mouth again. "I was working." He said, "Federal business, ongoing surveillance connected to a cybercrime investigation." Megan opened her mouth, maybe to say something else, but Darren reached inside his suit jacket for half a second. Megan stepped back. Everyone in the room saw from an inside pocket. He pulled out a thin leather badge holder, quietly. Without flair, he flipped it open and held it up for the judge to see. "United States Secret Service, Field Operations, Cyber Fraud Task Force," he said. "Badge number 4291837. The silence cracked into whispers. The court officer near the judge's bench shifted in his seat. A few people turned to look at Megan. She didn't speak. Her face, which had been resting in that lazy grin, had gone stone still. Judge Leary gestured toward the bailiff, who stepped over, glanced at the badge, then nodded to the judge. A beat passed. Then the judge leaned slightly forward and spoke. "Miss Raskin, do you want to answer?" Megan blinked, her lips parted just enough to begin to shape words, but nothing emerged. "I was not at liberty to reveal my status during the stop," Darren said, his voice never increasing. "That's procedure when you're undercover, but what I can reveal now under oath is that I was tracking a suspicious money transfer pattern that had just flagged accounts associated with South Georgia." A soft gasp from a juror. "I was told to remain in the area and watch." He went on. "I drove a plain rental windows factory, tinted, and within 5 minutes of parking across from the strip center, I was stopped and questioned. Without warning, she asked me where I was from, why I was in that area, why I did have an out-of-state plate. She did not run my ID until after she had searched my car. He just stopped talking, looked at the jury, then over at the judge. I said to her I was working. She laughed. All eyes were again on Megan. She now stood straighter, not saying a word, her eyes darting between the judge and the prosecutor. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man named Charles Givens, was like someone had just leaned close and whispered something sharp into his ear. He leaned into his mic and said, "Your Honor, may we request a short recess before proceeding?" But the judge didn't react right away. She was still observing Darren, perhaps attempting to wrap her mind around what just occurred. And in that moment, in front of everybody, the scales were tipped. What began as mere another courtroom procedure had transformed into something no one foresaw, but what actually happened that day along the roadside. Prior to the badge, prior to the silence, prior to the courtroom, even knowing his name, Darren recalled everything. It was a little after 5 p.m. when Darren pulled out into State 75 just past Herrera, a tiny stretch of town that most folks only saw in their rearview mirror. The sun was still high, casting long shadows over the peaceful parking lot in front of a gas station and dollar store. Darren had parked close to the edge, looking. The streetway he was driving a silver Nissan Altima recently off a rental lot in Jacksonville. Nothing flashy, just another car in a sea of southern dust he'd been assigned to watch for a suspected courier. Someone on the payroll laundering digital money through physical drop-offs at small-town ATMs. His duty wasn't to act, just to sit discreet, but before he could even get out his phone to take a surveillance note, he saw a patrol SUV circling the lot. It went by once, then again, slower. Darren didn't flinch. It wasn't the first time he'd been watched. And then the lights came on. The SUV swung in front of him at an angle, blocking him, and the door popped open quick. A tall white officer emerged, hand resting close to her belt. Not on her weapon, but near enough to make a point. Her name tag read, "Rascon, you live around here?" she asked, as she stepped forward. "No, ma'am, just working," Darren said, polite, measured working. Doing what he looked at her, this was always the game, say too. Little. You're hiding something. Say too much, you're arrogant, I'm just noticing some activity in the area. Her eyes narrowed, watching. She took a step. Closer step out of the car for me. He sighed softly, placing his hands where she could see them. Is there a reason, officer? Your tint's illegal. You can't even see into the front seat from the side. That's a safety issue. Darren looked straight ahead. The tint was factory standard, he'd checked the specs, but he didn't protest. She asked for license and registration, then inquired who the vehicle belonged to, then inquired why a person from Florida was operating a vehicle in a Georgia parking lot, then inquired if he was lost. And then, after a period of 5 minutes, she inquired if she could search the vehicle. Am I being detained? Darren inquired. You're being suspicious, he snickered under his breath. That word always came up, ma'am. I'd rather not have my vehicle searched. Without cause, she backed up, called something into her radio. 2. More squad cars arrived within minutes. They searched him, removed all contents from his pockets, phone, wallet, pen, a receipt, half crumpled from a gas station in Lake City. She held the receipt up as, if it was evidence, you. Military, one of the young officers asked. No, you law enforcement. I didn't say that you got a badge. Darren looked at him. I'm not obligated to answer that. Megan Rascon did not like that she began moving in a circle, the car like. It was a trap waiting to pounce. She bent her head in through the open window. No drugs, no weapons, no smell. She growled, but something's wrong here. Darren stood stock still, hands still, where she could see them, sweat collecting at the bottom of his neck. He did not wince when she opened the trunk. Without saying anything, just kept staring, knowing that anything. One bad breath might turn the entire thing askew. After 20 minutes, they quit. No ticket, no apology, not even a have a nice day, keep your nose clean, she said, flipping his wallet back to him. And maybe don't hang around places where you don't belong, Darren said. Nothing, just took the wallet, got back in the car, and drove off, without a word he'd filed. The internal report later that night, not through regular channels but through the contact line assigned for federal agents experiencing interference, he hadn't planned to press. His role wasn't to cause a disturbance, but when he received the court subpoena 2 weeks later, informing him Megan had made a formal complaint against him for failure to assist and violation of the vehicle code, he knew it was personal. Now she'd attempted to turn the narrative, make him the issue, but she had no concept. Who she was working with, or how many people had witnessed what she'd done that day. Darren Cole didn't look like the kind of man who blended in, but that's exactly what made him good at his job. At 6'2", with sharp features and a voice that carried. Without needing to shout, he knew how to hold a room when he wanted to, but most of the time he made sure people didn't remember him at all. That's the first thing they teach you at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe presence is a tool, not a spotlight. Darren had spent the last 8 years in the Secret Service's Cyber Fraud Task Force, working mostly out of their Tampa office. His specialty wasn't bodyguard detail or counterfeiting. It was digital trails, cryptocurrency, theft, laundering rings, and the expanding black market web of fraud, syndicates trading in stolen data like it was gold. He wasn't what most people imagined when they thought Secret Service. He didn't wear sunglasses or whisper into an earpiece. Most days, he was in jeans, sitting in a beige minivan outside a rundown strip mall, waiting to see who was stupid enough to think they were untraceable. His mission that week in Georgia was simple. Observe a suspected courier named Anton Levesque, flagged for multiple ATM deposits, tied to a known laundering network, operating between Miami and Birmingham. The idea was to track the middlemen, not scare them off. No arrests, no confrontation, just a quiet document of who appeared where and when. Darren had only been in Valdosta for 2 days when Officer Raskin pulled him over. It threw everything off, not just the operation, but the principle. He'd kept his badge out of sight on purpose. It wasn't just policy, it was protection in his line of work. The wrong person, knowing who you are, can get you followed, exposed, or worse. But being treated like a criminal for doing his job, that still cut deep. It reminded him of something his father once said to him in high school, after a local cop accused him of stealing his own bike. Doesn't matter what badge you wear if they decide they don't like the look of you. His father, Clarence Cole, had worked logistics for UOPS in Gainesville for 27 years, never missed a day, never raised his voice. But the world had still found ways to remind him what it remembered. Black men who were too tall or spoke too clear. Darren didn't want to discuss that evening in Herrera, not with his boss, not with his girlfriend Simone, not even with himself. But the report did need to be filed, and when that citation arrived in his mailbox, he knew silence was no longer an option. His boss, Special Agent Carla Drummond, called him right away. "She actually filed on you." She asked, her voice tight. "She did." Carla slowly exhaled. "Wanted us to step in." Darren shook his head. "No. I want to deal with it in court. You sure I want them to witness? I want it on record." So he prepared his statement, pulled every detail he could legally disclose, surveillance logs, GPS data, even the time-stamped photo of Raskin standing next to his trunk, her hand on the lid. His badge would only come out if needed, and after she'd already attempted to discredit him, he wasn't there for revenge, he wasn't seeking headlines, he only sought the truth to land where it belonged. And when that day arrived, when her laughter rang out through the courtroom and the smirk crossed her face, Darren didn't become angry. He just opened the badge holder. Because that's the other thing they teach you early in the service. When you've got the truth, you don't have to raise your voice to be heard. But he wasn't the only one who was willing to speak, because there were others who saw what occurred that day, and they were on the verge of introducing themselves. The court reconvened 20 minutes later. The prosecutor's face was inscrutable. Judge Charles Givens had come back with a legal pad with new notes, turning pages with a nervousness that didn't equate to his normal steady beat. Megan Raskin, for the first time that day, felt uneasy in her own flesh. Darren sat quietly at the witness stand, hands clasped. His badge had already been confirmed by the bailiff and logged into the court record. No theatrics, no speeches, just facts. "Mr. Cole," the judge started, "you've established your identity and offered proof of your work with the United States. Secret Service, is that right?" "Yes, Your Honor, and you were doing federal surveillance in Lowndes County. At the time of the incident, I was..." She stopped. "Why didn't you make yourself known as an agent at the stop?" "Because I wasn't obliged to, and because making a declaration would have ruined an open investigation. He said we're told not to disclose credentials unless absolutely required for security or legal purposes." The judge nodded, then addressed Officer Raskin. "Officer, why?" she said slowly. Were you made aware that the individual you quoted was a federal agent? Megan changed. No, ma'am. Did he give you any sense that he was law enforcement? He was evasive. Megan said quickly. He was evasive. He didn't cooperate. Darren spoke up calmly. I presented my license. I followed her requests. I simply didn't agree to a warrantless search. Megan's jaw shifted slightly, as if she was biting back something. Givens cleared his throat. Your Honor, we'd like to request the opportunity to question the witness in more detail about the events of that day. The judge granted. Darren went over everything, the patrol car circling twice, the aggressive approach, the unnecessary backup, the search. Without consent, his refusal to answer certain questions, the way Megan leaned into the car and muttered to herself, her leaving. Words don't linger in areas where you don't belong. The words hit like a slap in the back row. A woman wearing a dark green blouse raised her hand. She was brought forward. Her name was Carla McKinney. She worked at the family-owned nail shop in front of the gas station. She remembered the day. Well, I saw the entire thing. She said, I was at the window with my co-worker. We saw him parked doing nothing, just sitting there. Then, the cop pulled up fast, like something bad had already happened. Did you witness any aggressive behavior from Mr. Cole? No. She said, he never even raised his voice. She was the one. Walking around his car like she was looking for something to find wrong. A man came forward next. Tim Sorensen, manager of the nearby barbecue joint. She didn't recognize him, so she treated him like a problem. I've seen that before, he said. Objection. Megan's lawyer snapped, but it didn't abate. The second from lingering. Piece by piece, Megan's account fell apart, not because Darren accused her of anything sensational, but because the truth held fast, and other individuals supported it. Her smirk never returned. She seemed smaller now, not in body but somehow quieter. Givens turned to her and inquired, Did you inform Mr. Cole he was in a place where he had no right to be? I don't recall stating that. Megan responded rigidly. Darren didn't blink. You said it. He said frankly, a hesitation. Then the judge glanced at Megan once more. Officer Raskin, do you still maintain your citation? You swore out. Megan hesitated. Her lawyer breathed something inaudible, but it was in vain. Everybody was attending. The jury, the clerk, the public benches filled with spectators who had read her name in the news. More than once, she finally replied, No, Your Honor. I rescind it. But the damage was already established, and what came after that was out of her hands. 2 weeks went by. The investigation into Officer Raskin was now public. The Valdosta Police Department, under pressure from both internal review boards and growing community attention, issued a formal statement. We take these things seriously and are committed to transparency. That didn't mean much to Darren. He'd heard similar lines before, neatly worded, intentionally vague. But something was different. This time people were talking, not in hashtags or headlines, but in lunchrooms, barber shops, waiting rooms, not only about Darren, but about how often individuals got profiled, how often silence prevailed. The part that lingered with most folks wasn't even the badge. It was the way he'd remained calm in court, how he allowed the facts to speak when everything else in the world around him was meant to manipulate them. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't hurled accusations. He simply spoke the truth and watched it do what truth often does. It made people uncomfortable that week. Darren got a call from the teacher who'd stepped forward. After the hearing, his name was Julian Withers. 45 teaches American history at a local high school, grew up in that very same Georgia county. I never made a complaint. Julian told me when they sat down for coffee one morning in Tifton, didn't think anybody would hear me. But when I saw your face on the news, I thought, damn, maybe now they have to. They spoke for more than an hour, not about Raskin, but about the burden that people carried every time they got behind the wheel, about how it wasn't merely fear. It was fatigue having to constantly prove that you fit, that you weren't dangerous, that you weren't attempting to get away with something. Darren listened. more than he spoke. That's what he did best. Read people. Get what they weren't saying. Julian wasn't thanking him, he was giving him something heavier, hope, coated in frustration. A couple of days thereafter, Darren got another message, this one from a lady called Rhonda Bailey. She was part-time at the city clerk's office and had assisted in transcribing courtroom proceedings for more than a decade and a half. I happened to be present that day. She penned, as you produced that badge, something in the room changed. You did not yell, you did not even blink yet. We all felt it. She signed off with a sentence which lingered on his mind. Sometimes, you don't have to fight back. You just have to stay still long enough for the truth to catch up. At the end of the month, Officer Raskin had formally quit. No press announcement, no press release, just a leaked internal memo through back channels announcing her departure. The department maintained her resignation had nothing to do with current personnel issues, but once again, nobody believed that Darren never boasted he didn't have to. When questioned subsequently if he believed justice had been done, he said not whole, but it's a beginning. In the silent weeks afterwards, he came back to his cases, more fraud rings, more watching. But something had moved, not the way he performed his work, but the way people regarded him when he entered. Into the room, he was the same agent, same calm voice, same. The man who did not blink. But now they listened, and that counted, because when institutions are slow to adapt, sometimes what it takes isn't noise, it's clarity, a refusal to believe, the lie, a willingness to wait, and when the time comes to talk with precision, and somewhere out there, someone else was going to be pulled over, questioned, doubted, perhaps even charged. But perhaps this time they'd recall Darren Cole and see they didn't have to shrink when the world attempted to make them smaller. A month later, Darren stood outside a federal office building in Tampa, gazing at the city lights blink under a weighty Florida twilight. He hadn't come for a case, no stakeouts, no victims, only contemplation in his right pocket. He had a thin envelope dated from a person named Andrew Morales, a young man from Tennessee who had read about Darren's case on the internet. The letter was typed wobbly in places. I used to believe that people like me would never be taken seriously, but when I saw your story, I understood. Maybe it's not about yelling louder, it's about having the right to be heard. First off, Darren folded it slowly and pushed it back into the envelope. He'd gotten others, like it notes from fathers, sons, and grandmothers, from folks who'd been stopped, asked questions, dismissed, who'd had stories they'd never spoken until now. What bound them wasn't anger. It was the silence, dignity, of people who'd learned to carry themselves through judgment, through stares, through silence, and somehow Darren had given that dignity a voice he didn't request. The spotlight he didn't desire to be a headline. But the moment Megan Raskin sneered in that courtroom and laughed at the notion that he might somehow be speaking the truth, something cracked open. She didn't laugh because he was incorrect. She laughed because she thought the system would side with her, that the courtroom, like the street, would lean in her direction, but it didn't, not that time. And perhaps that is where change starts, not in policies or press releases, but in those brief, raw instances when truth causes people to stop and look at themselves. People will forgive. Megan Raskin's name, they'll forgive the courtroom setup, the transcript, the technicalities, but they won't forgive Darren Cole. Not because he was dramatic, not because he revealed a scandal, but because he did something much more unusual. He spoke the truth, and he waited. The lesson: you don't need a title to deserve respect. You don't need a uniform to be believed, and no one gets to laugh at your truth just because they feel they already know your story. There are thousands of others, like Darren, quiet professionals, people just trying to do their jobs, carry their names with pride, live without fear of being misread. They deserve more than tolerance. They deserve recognition, dignity, and space. So the next time someone assumes, interrupts, or judges, pause, reflect on Darren Cole, reflect on how fast things can turn and who's left bared when the facts surface, because truth has a way of showing up, even when nobody's prepared for it. Et si cette histoire vous a fait ressentir quelque chose, de l'enjeu, de la surprise, du respect, peut-être même de l'espoir, ne la laissez pas s'arrêter ici. Partagez-la, parlez-en. Questionnez ce qui a besoin d'être questionné. And if you'd like to listen, more real stories that disrupt what we believe, and remain with us, because the world is altered. One truth at a time, and your voice has value in that change.